discussion. And now I'll turn it over to Noam Chomsky.
Thank you. Very sorry I can't be with you in person, but have to live with the way the dice roll. This particular conference is focusing on an issue that arises against a complex and threatening background. We happen to be living at a moment of human history which is not only remarkable, but in fact unique. We're living at a moment of confluence of a significant range of crises, all converging, at least 4 major ones, other less major. Each of them deserves extensive discussion. There's no time. I'll only be able to barely mention them and touch the surface and try to place the issue of authoritarianism within that context. Let's begin with the least dangerous of the 4, the pandemic, which is now wrecking the economy, killing already 130,000 people. The United States is almost alone in the world, become a pariah state in that it's out of control. Other states are containing it one way or another. It's surely going to have a major impact on the nature of the society. It's very likely that another pandemic will come unless we take steps to prevent it. And that means looking at what caused this pandemic. And in fact, we are now in a situation somewhat like 2003, after the SARS epidemic, when scientists warned that there'll be another one, probably more serious. It was a coronavirus epidemic, and sketched out the means that we should use to prevent it. They were not pursued for reasons which still obtain, and we should pay some attention to them. One was simple capitalist logic. The drug companies aren't interested in, they follow the rules that say, try to make profit tomorrow and don't spend money, don't waste money on some tragedy that might occur in a couple of years. So they're out by capitalist logic, which still prevails. Then comes the neoliberal assault on the society for 40 years, following Reagan's slogan, famous slogan, government is not the solution. Well, actually government does most of the work, basic work on creating vaccines and drugs, but it's not supposed to be involved in the area of marketing and profit making. That goes into the private sector. So government was blocked. Then comes the malevolence and incompetence of particular leaders. What happened in the United States since 2016 is shocking. No time to go through it, but the US was singularly unprepared. All of these factors remain unless we deal with them. Another, probably worse pandemic is coming. And those who have created the system from which we are now suffering are working hard, relentlessly, to try to ensure that it remains, even in a harsher form, with greater surveillance and control. That's happening before our eyes. Well, let's take a look at the other 3. Now, to take a look at those, let's go back to last January. As you know, every January, the scientists, political analysts assess the world security situation and encapsulate it in the setting of the Doomsday Clock. Every year since Trump has been in office, the minute hand of the Doomsday Clock has gone closer to midnight every year. 2 years ago, it reached the closest point it has ever been since 1947, after the dropping of the atom bombs. This year, the analysts gave up on minutes. They turned to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight. And they gave the same three reasons they had in the past. One is the growing threat of nuclear war, which is terminal for the species. Second, the growing threat of climate change, global warming, which is threatening to reach catastrophic dimensions, basically the end of organized human life on Earth. And the third, the deterioration of democracy. Why does that belong there? Because it's only if we have a vibrant, functioning democracy in which people can, informed population can become engaged in affairs of state, in public affairs, other matters that concern them. It's only under those conditions that we can hope to deal with the existential crises. So what has happened to these three crises since January? They've all been made worse, coming from the White House. The arms control regime, Trump has continued on his program of dismantling the arms control regime, which has offered some degree of security against terminal war. Open Skies Treaty, dismantled. The INF Treaty had already been destroyed. The administration is now providing entirely frivolous reasons to try to prevent negotiation of the New START Treaty, the last major treaty of the three, which is due for negotiation in February. That'll probably go if they're in office. The administration is now considering the first nuclear tests to break since 1992, breaking that agreement. All of this is raising complete euphoria in the arms industry. They're delighted with the public money that's pouring into them, the chances to produce new weapons to destroy us all, to encourage adversaries to do the same. So down the road, they get even bigger contracts to try to create some protection, of course, in vain, against the weapon systems that they're creating and encouraging adversaries to create. That's what's happening in the arms control. What about global warming? Same thing. In the president's February 2020 budget, pandemic is raging. President presents its budget. Continued defunding of the Center for Disease Control and every other health-related element of the government. He's been doing that every single year. It continues in the course of the pandemic. And it's compensated by increased spending for the military and for fossil fuel industries to try to accelerate the race to destruction on all fronts. That's the federal budget. Meanwhile, the corporate executives he's appointed to supervise destruction of the environment are hard at work, very quietly, changing regulations, deregulating, eliminating controls on that somehow mitigate part of the harmful effect of pouring CO2 into the environment, and also that protect the population. Some of them, the malice is almost indescribable. So very quietly, regulations were eliminated that limit air pollution. This is in the middle of a respiratory crisis, which is greatly extended by air pollution in particular places, in the places where people live near polluting plants because they have no choice. Who are they? Blacks, Puerto Ricans, people that don't matter. If they vote the wrong way, we can get rid of them. Tens of thousands are put at risk. All very quiet. What about deterioration of democracy? Well, as Jackie pointed out, it's proceeding apace. The executive branch of the government has been totally neutralized, barely exists. It's down to a group of sycophants, cowardly sycophants who don't dare to offend the master. The latest step has been to fire the federal district attorney for the southern region of New York because he was starting to get too close to investigating the swamp that Trump has created in Washington. He was continuing the work of the inspectors general, who were totally purged a couple of weeks ago because they're pursuing the same objective. Not a peep from Congress, from the Republican Congress, nothing. Even when Trump went out of his way to humiliate one of their senior members, Charles Grassley, who had spent his career in trying to establish the Inspectors General office. Next step, which is already reported, maybe will take place, is a pending purge of the military, of the top military. Some of them are speaking out of line, got to get rid of them. They're supporting the protests. So let's purge them and make sure that the military is completely in the hands of loyalists. This is not a minor matter for reasons that Jackie mentioned before about what might happen in November. Well, all of this is happening while on the streets of the country, there's an astonishing event taking place, completely without precedent. There have been protests over police killings before, nothing remotely like this in the scale, level of public support, which is overwhelming, solidarity, black-white solidarity, and the fact that it's looking beyond the specific crime of police killing to its roots in 400 years of vicious repression that have left a grim legacy that has to be dismantled if there's any hope for a revival of democracy. And this is against another background. White supremacy is a very serious issue in the United States, enormous issue. If you go back to 2016, 20% of terrorism-related threats and actions were attributed by the federal authorities to white supremacy. 2018, it was 98%. That's 3 years of Trump. 2019, according to Christopher Wray, FBI director, it went even higher. Almost all white supremacy terrorist threats and actions stimulated by rhetoric from the White House, constant. This is the situation we're now facing. Contending forces, or what will emerge from the pandemic, is going to determine the fate of human society. There are sharply contending forces, those that are seeking to impose a harsher regime of the kind that has led to these crises, those who are struggling against it. The outcome of this struggle is going to determine whether the human experiment can continue down the road.